Hello, this is an AQA A-Level Theory and Methods revision video, and this is part one where we're just going to be focusing mainly on the methods to begin with. I'll be covering theory-based stuff in part two of this video. I just thought I'd break it up because otherwise the videos will just be too long. First, we're going to be looking at methodology. This is concerned both with research methods and the philosophies underlying them. It tries to establish the best ways of obtaining data about the social world. The main focus of sociologists is either using quantitative or qualitative methods. Positivism is an approach developed by Comte and Durkheim, who are functionalists, which suggests that sociology can be scientific. Positivism argues that all sociological research should be quantitative, that there are objective social facts about the social world which can be expressed through statistics, and these facts are objective and value-free, which means no bias. Research look for correlations and analyse causal relationships between data. A multivariate analysis can help researchers find what the true causes of things are. They discover laws of human behaviour. Positivists believe that human behaviour is shaped by external stimuli, and that we should only study what we can observe to be more scientific. Lab experiments are a type of quantitative data which can be tested in precise conditions and controlled by the researcher. The researcher develops a hypothesis which is then tested. Experiments aim to isolate the effects of independent variables. A control and the experiment is compared to find precise causes. Experiments are replicated to test the reliability of findings. Sociologists rarely use lab experiments because there are unnatural settings so people may not behave normally, and it's impractical to study longitudinally or large sample sizes. Field experiments take place in natural settings. For example, Rosenthal and Jacobson's study, they use a field experiment to investigate the effects of labelling on education. It's difficult to control variables in field studies and can often lead to a Hawthorne effect if participants are aware that they're being watched. If participants are unaware of their observation, this could raise ethical issues. The comparative method follows the same ideas of an experiment, but takes advantage of events that have already taken place. Social groups, times, or places are systematically compared to try to isolate variables. When it's impractical or unethical to use experiments, the comparative method is used instead. This method has been widely used by Durkheim on suicide, Weber on the Protestant work ethic, and Marx on social change. It's been more difficult to isolate variables than in controlled experiments, but it's based on real-life social events and is the only systematic way to study long-term or wide-scale social change, which is central to sociology. Interpretativists advocate the use of qualitative data to interpret social action, emphasizing the importance of meanings, motives, and actions. It requires the understanding of meaningful behavior by humans. This often requires imagining the situation from another person's viewpoint, which involves the development of empathy. People interpret the meaning of stimuli before reacting. An understanding is required of people's unobservable subjective states, which cannot be reduced to statistical data. Weber sees sociology as the study of social action. This requires Verstehen to explain why people behave in particular ways. For example, in his study, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, Weber tries to understand why Calvinists reinvested their money and became early capitalists. They see individuals as possessing a self-concept or image of themselves. This is largely shaped through other people's reactions to them. Interactionists prefer methods such as an in-depth interview or participant observation. Labeling theory is the best-known version of interactionism. Phenomenologists reject the idea that causal explanations are possible. The social world has to be classified before it can be measured. Classifications depend on the judgment of individuals. These judgments reflect the common sense and stereotypes of individuals rather than some objective system. As there's no way of choosing between classification systems, no hard facts can be produced, so causal explanations aren't possible. Phenomenologists try to understand the classifications people use to give order and meaning to the social world, for example, Cicero's study of juvenile justice. Most feminists support interpretivist qualitative methods. They tend to reject the masculine scientific approaches which lack empathy for those studied. For example, Oakley supports feminist interviewing. in which the researcher gets to know the respondent and collaborates with them, rather than just exploiting them for information. This involves the development of a report so that the researcher can better understand and relate to the interviewee. This may increase the validity of the findings, although positivists believe that it can prevent the researcher from being objective. They could go native. Now we're going to be looking at research processes. Sociologists have to select an area to study. This is influenced by multiple factors, including the values and beliefs of the researcher, developments in the subject, developments in the social world, government policies, research funding, and practicalities. A lot of sociological funding comes from the ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council, which derives its funds from the government. It tends to favour research which is relevant to government policies or concerned with social problems which are government priorities. Business funding tends to favour research which can increase profitability of the business. Some independent or charitable sources of funds may fund research which is more critical of the government. Informed consent, aims and methods of the study are explained to the participants who then agree to take part. This avoids deceit but poses problems for covert methods like covert participant observation. Many codes require parental consent for research involving children. Without informed consent, there's a danger that the research is an invasion of privacy. Confidentiality can pose a problem in some studies, like for example if authorities demand information from researchers or if it's difficult to disguise the identity of the respondents. This is particularly important when dealing with sensitive issues. Avoiding harm is the ultimate aim of the ethical codes. It can involve minimizing risks of harm to participants or actively promoting their well-being. The above principles can be contested or justified in some cases. Now we're going to be looking at primary sources. Primary sources are data collected by sociologists themselves. Like choosing a topic, the choice of method may be influenced by factors such as funding. The nature of the topic may make particular methods more appropriate, and the approach of the researcher will influence the choice. Researchers question the reliability of the primary method and the validity of the primary method. There are 4 types of validity: measurement validity, whether something measures what it claims; internal validity, whether a causal relationship in data is real or not; external validity, whether results can be generalized; and ecological validity, whether the theory is true in everyday social settings. A sample is a part of a larger population chosen from a cross-section of a larger group, so that the sample is representative. Something is used in order to generalize about the larger population. The population is the total group that the researcher is interested in. The sampling unit is the individual thing or person in that population, and the sampling frame is a list of all of those in the population. There are a variety of ways of producing a sample. In random sampling, every sampling unit has an equal chance of being chosen. It relies upon statistical probability to ensure a representative sample, so a large sample is needed to give a high chance of representativeness. In stratified random sampling, to ensure representativeness, the population is divided into groups according to important variables such as class, gender, and ethnicity. Then, the sample is chosen using the same proportions as their preponderance as the population. This method ensures a good cross-section and requires a smaller sample than random sampling. However, it's only possible with a sampling frame of the whole population and their information, which are difficult to obtain. Quotas are established which determine how many people with particular characteristics are studied. Once a quota is filled, no more people in that category are studied. However, the samples may be distorted if the researcher questions people in a particular place and time, as the sample would not be representative. Also, people may be willing to reveal personal details that would allow them to be put into a quota category. There may be a practical difficulty in finding members for particular quota groups. In multi-stage sampling, this involves getting a sample of a sample. For example, a sample of voters in a sample of constituencies. It can save time and money, but it makes the sample less representative. In snowballing, a member of a sample puts the researcher in touch with other potential members of the sample. It's useful for studying groups who can't be easily located, but the networks connecting make it less representative. Non-representative sampling occurs when members of a sample are picked because of their specific characteristics. It's used to falsify a general theory by looking for exceptions to a rule and to find key informants who can provide the most information about an area of social life. It's convenient, saving time and money. Case studies involve the study of a single example of something. They can be used to develop a comprehensive understanding of something by studying it in depth, to develop a general theoretical approach by falsifying a theory, to develop a typology, and to generate a hypothesis. A problem with case studies is that you can't generalize from them. However, Bryman suggests that this can be overcome by doing multiple case studies. A life history is a case study of one person's life. Plummer suggests that they're useful for helping to understand the world from an individual's point of view. They offer rich detail and can be used to generate a hypothesis. Some feminists, like Mize, think that life histories can be used to help women understand their own situation and perhaps change their lives. Postmodernists sometimes use case studies to explore increased fluidity and variation in people's experiences. Pilot studies are small-scale preliminary studies carried out before a bigger study to help improve, help to design or test the feasibility of the proposed research. They can be used to test how useful and unambiguous interview questions are, to develop ways to gain the cooperation of respondents, to develop research skills, and to decide whether to proceed with the research. Social surveys are large-scale studies which collect standardized data about large groups, often using questionnaires, and there are three main types: factual surveys, attitude surveys, and explanatory surveys. Questionnaires are a primary source of data consisting of written questions. When administered by an interviewer, a questionnaire becomes a structured interview. This allows clarification of questions but introduces the possibility of interviewer bias. Postal questionnaires avoid interviewer bias but have low response rates, and telephone questionnaires tend to result in unrepresentative samples. Questionnaires involve operationalizing concepts and turning concepts into questions. A problem with operationalization is that the researcher imposes their own meaning on a concept. Questions can be open-ended or fixed choice, and questionnaire data is analyzed using multivariate analysis and statistical techniques. It's good because large amounts of data can be collected very quickly. It's easy to quantify the results, find correlations, and use multivariate analysis to look for causes. It's standardized, so easy to replicate, making the findings more reliable. However, different answers may not reflect real differences between respondents, since they may interpret questions differently. The operationalization of concepts distorts the world by shaping concepts in line with the researchers rather than the respondents' meanings. The validity of the data may be undermined by deliberate lying, faulty memories, or respondents not fully understanding their own motivations. People may not act in line with the questionnaires' answers. Another primary source is interviews. Structured interviews are questionnaires administered by a researcher. Unstructured interviews don't have preset questions and are more like a conversation. Many interviews are partially structured, with some preset questions or a list of topics. Most interviews are non-directive. They try to avoid influencing the interviewee in order to increase the objectivity of the research. Group interviews are sometimes used to put respondents at ease or make them more reflective and more likely to open up as a result of interaction between interviewees. Focus groups are a type of group interview often used by political parties. They can lead to a greater probing of why people do things and allow the researcher to observe how people construct meanings in groups. They're often favoured by interactionists and regarded as more naturalistic than one-to-one interviews. However, the answers given may be influenced by the most prominent members of the group. Interviewing is good because it's a practical and flexible method of research. Interviews can examine past, present, or future behaviour, subjective states, opinions, attitudes, or simple factual information. They could be as in-depth or superficial as the researcher wants. Interviews are useful for studying groups who might not return questionnaires or consent to participant observation. Concepts can be clarified and there is more opportunity for respondents to express ideas in their own way, say what is important to them, and explore issues in depth. However, social factors such as ethnicity may influence the sort of answers members from different social groups are willing to give. The presence of the researcher may influence answers. Interviewers may consciously or unconsciously lead respondents to preferred answers. The validity of interview data may be affected by respondents being untruthful, having faulty memories, or not fully understanding their own behaviour. Positives see observations as essential, whereas interpretivists tend to particularly support participant observation. Ethnography is the study of a way of life and often uses participant observation. Overt participant observation is honest about doing the research. This method is adopted because it's unethical to mislead subjects. It allows the observer to ask questions, and the observer can retain some detachment. Covert participant observation means the researcher doesn't reveal that they're doing the research. This method is adopted because respondents act more naturally, allows access, and they can become fully engaged with the group and develop an insider's perspective. Participant observation is good because they're less likely to impose their own concept structures and preconceptions of the data. It's difficult for respondents to lie or mislead, creating higher internal validity. However, it is time-consuming and expensive, and it's limited to a small number of people in a single place. For non-participant observation, it hasn't got a Hawthorne effect which increases internal validity. Researchers can record their observations as they occur. This is more reliable than memory and recording field notes after their observation. However, it is unethical to lie to the respondents, and it's difficult to opt out of illegal or immoral activities. Longitudinal research is also a primary source, where following a group of people over an extended period of time using period data collection. They're usually large-scale quantitative studies, but participant observation can also be longitudinal. People don't have to report on events retrospectively, so problems of faulty memory or reinterpretation of events are reduced. It can be used to examine a large number of variables. Report is built over time and a richer Verstehen is established so that empathy can be achieved. However, the size of participating sample may drop over time, affecting the reliability of findings. Whatever method is used will have its own specific limitations, and taking part in the study might affect the subject's behaviour. Now we're going to look at secondary sources. Secondary sources are data that's already been produced. Existing sociological studies become secondary sources when used by other sociologists. Secondary sources can be quantitative or qualitative. They can be historical or contemporary. Secondary sources are used for practical reasons. They save time and money, and they may include data that's beyond the scope of sociologists who collect. There are fewer problems of access than primary data. Secondary data that's already public generally doesn't have ethical problems. Secondary sources allow for the study of past societies for which it's impossible to produce in primary sources. Government statistics cover a wide range of topics, including demography, crime, employment, industrial relations, educational achievement, family life, household composition data, and so on. The government conducts statistical surveys such as the General Household Survey and has carried out a census every decade. Such sources are valuable because they're easily accessible and much more thorough than any data sociologists could produce. The census is the only survey that tries to include the entire population, and participation is legally compulsory. However, official statistics can be unreliable. Methods of surveys include self-report studies like questionnaires and victim studies. However, such studies may not be entirely reliable due to factors like non-response and the limitations of sampling. Historical sources are vital for studying long-term social changes. Parliamentary investigations, diaries, letters, autobiographies, speeches, and mass media reports are all useful sources. Statistical sources suffer from the same possible outcomes of reliability and validity as contemporary statistics. Qualitative sources reflect the subjective views of those who produce them, and sometimes this can be useful, but other times not. Life documents are created by individuals which record subjective states. They include diaries, letters, photos, biographies, memoirs, suicide notes, films, pictures, and so on. Plummer suggests that personal documents are rarely used by contemporary sociologists because surviving documents may not be representative. They're open to different interpretations, they're highly subjective, and the content may be influenced by the identity of the person or the intended readers of the document. Plummer believes, however, that live documents are still very useful because they allow insight into people's subjective states. The mass media may be unreliable for providing factual information, but may themselves be objects of study. Some researchers see studies as useful for revealing the ideological frameworks of those who produce mass media. This is important because of the influence of the mass media. Pawson describes different ways of analysing mass media. Formal content analysis involves classifying and counting content. This technique is reliable, but it involves interfering with the meaning of words within a text from numbers alone. Thematic analysis examines a topic and looks for the messages that lie behind the coverage. Studies using this analysis rarely use representative samples and don't examine the impact of the messages on the audience. Textual analysis involves a detailed analysis of small pieces of text. This relies heavily on the researcher's interpretation and may therefore be unreliable. Audience analysis examines how the audience interprets the messages of the media. The honesty and openness of respondents may be questionable, and studies can't reveal long-term effects of media messages. Scott argues that the following criteria can be used to assess secondary source material: authenticity, credibility, and representativeness and meaning. Now we're looking at sociological theory and methods. Bryman argues that most sociologists use a mixture of quantitative and qualitative sources. For example, Eileen Barker's study of the Unification Church, which used overt participation, questionnaires, and interviews. Bryman describes how multi-strategy research is used in different ways. Triangulation, to check the reliability of data produced by using different methods. Qualitative research facilitating quantitative research, and quantitative research facilitating qualitative research. Critical social science develops methods of study which are critical of society and have the aim of improving it. They therefore reject the view that sociology can be value-free and shouldn't be used to try to change the social world. Harvey sees a crucial aspect of critical social science as a deconstruction, taking apart an aspect of the social world to understand how it really works. This is followed by reconceptualization, so that the social world can be thought of in a different way. This in turn leads to praxis, a practical activity designed to improve the social world. Critical social science methods involve reflexivity. The researcher reflects upon the social world and tries to understand it. These reflections then create changes in the social world they are observing. Reflexivity means the methods reflect back on the social world and may change it. Feminists such as Abbott and Wallace criticize the male-stream research for researching only men and using male-only samples, ignoring women's issues such as housework, and neglecting sex and gender as variables. Oakley argues that in a masculine approach to interviewing, there's an emphasis on objectivity and detachment. Interviewees are manipulated as sources of data and have an entirely passive role. The emphasis is on reliability. Oakley believes that in a feminist approach to interviewing, the interviewer should be willing to answer questions and provide helpful information to respondents. The research should also be collaborative, gaining consent and helping those who are being interviewed. She also believes that interviewees can help improve the validity of the results by becoming reflective about their own lives and by checking whether the findings reflect their own experiences. Feminist standpoint epistemology argues that women have a unique insight into the social world by virtue of being an oppressed group. Some standpoint feminists, such as Stanley and White, believe that research should examine a plurality of women's viewpoints. Critics such as Pawson suggest that some feminist researchers won't accept the viewpoints of women they disagree with. Standpoint epistemology neglects the oppressors and therefore makes it difficult to understand how oppression comes about. It can be relativistic, for example, accepting a variety of women's viewpoints as valid without any way of distinguishing between more and less useful ones. Epistemological postmodernists reject the idea that any research procedure can produce a singular and true description of the world. Lyotard sees all knowledge of storytelling, with no way of distinguishing between true and untrue stories. Postmodern ethnography involves a collection of different people's stories. Some postmodernists are simply concerned to reveal the contradictions in other sociological theories using the technique of deconstruction. Many critics regard the postmodernism as too relativistic. They point out that postmodern stories about the social world can't be shown to be better than any other stories. Ethnography becomes similar to fiction, with no special claim to describe a real world. This is the final section, Sociology and Science. Positivists see sociology as science-based, in the use of objective observation, statistics, a search for correlations, causal relationships, and laws. They use an inductive approach in which the researcher starts with evidence and induces theories from the evidence. Popper argues that you can't ever be sure that you've found the truth. What's considered true today may be disproved tomorrow. A scientific theory is one that can be tested. From the theory, one can deduce hypotheses and make precise predictions. If repeatedly tested and found to be correct, a theory may be provisionally accepted, but there's always a chance that it will be falsified in future. Popper uses a deductive approach. This is unlike positivism, which is inductive. Both Popper and positivists see a scientific methodology as desirable. Positivists see science as producing an objective truth, since it's always possible a theory will be falsified in future. Phenomenologists reject the idea of a scientific sociology because the social world can't be objectively classified and measured. Classification reflects the subjective categories and interpretations of individuals. Sociologists can only study the way classifications are made. They can't discover some underlying objective truth. Kaplan distinguishes reconstructed logics and logics in use. Gomes argues that Darwin's theory of evolution was accepted because of the social context of Victorian Britain and its capitalism, welcoming the ideas of natural selection and survival of the fittest. Opposition to the revolution encouraged thinking allowed Victorian Britons to see themselves as superior to people in conquered colonies. Lack of fossil evidence of evolution was ignored because of the social context. Kuhn argues that scientific communities develop a commitment to a particular paradigm. This is a set of shared beliefs about some aspects of the physical world, how it works, how to study it, and how to interpret evidence. A paradigm provides the complete framework within which scientists operate. Ideas from outside the paradigm are normally dismissed. In scientific revolutions, anomalies which the paradigm can't explain come to the forefront. One paradigm is rejected and replaced by another, and science returns to its normal state where the paradigm is not open to question. Sociology can be seen as pre-scientific because there are a variety of paradigms such as feminism, Marxism, and postmodernism. It may not be desirable for sociology to become scientific because the conflict between perspectives is a critical element of sociology. Realists like Sayer believe that it is both possible and desirable for sociology to be scientific. They see physical and social sciences as similar. Sayer argues that some scientists have closed systems in which all variables can be measured. However, many sciences are open in that all variables can't be measured, nor precise predictions made. Sayer therefore rejects Popper's view that a scientific theory must make precise predictions. Sayer believes that sociology is scientific, but societies are complex and open systems, making it impossible to make precise decisions. There are different views on whether sociology is objective or value-free. Comte, Durkheim, and Marx all thought that they were objective and scientific. Weber argued that the selection of a topic for research was bound to be influenced by values, but that the research itself could be value-free. However, many sociologists who considered their work value-free have been accused of being value-laden. Functionalists have been seen as having a conservative bias in stressing the usefulness of institutions. Durkheim's values are revealed in his opposition to inherited wealth. Marx was committed to revolutionary politics, and Weber's values influences his view that the bureaucracy could stifle human freedom. As Weber suggested, values are bound to influence what topics sociologists think are important enough to study. Sociologists' values may also influence which aspect of the topic they study. All research is selective. For example, what questions are included in a questionnaire, or what aspects of a social setting an observer takes note of, and values may influence the selection process. All research may be influenced by values. For example, interpretivist sociologists see questionnaires as distorting the real nature of the social world in line with the researcher's assumptions and values. Positivists see participant observation research as based on the subjective and value-laden perceptions of interpretive researchers. For many postmodernists, knowledge is simply the reflection of the values of the social groups that create the knowledge. Other sociologists argue that sociology is not simply an expression of people's values. Thank you for watching part 1 of my theory and methods video focusing on the methods. As you can see, my next video will be about the theory. I just thought it'd be better to break it in two, and it'll be, easier to do it in two halves instead of, maybe like an hour long video. I hope this was helpful to you, and thank you for watching.